Hi everyone, just going to do a quick video on here, a relatively easy one, hopefully. Today we're going to talk a little bit about counterfeit games. Counterfeit games have been out there for a long time. Some systems it was easier, some systems it was not. Some of the ones like the PlayStations, GameCubes, that sort of things, you often had to have a mod chip or something else to be able to do games, but copy games are much easier. Chip-based games, so any of your cartridge-based ones, have tended to be a lot easier for them to be faked. So you do actually quite often can find fake ones out in the wild. Today I'll just go over through a couple of things that you can kind of look for that makes some of them look to discern whether they are a fake or not right off the bat. Have a couple examples out here to start, but we'll sort of go from the beginning. We'll look at original Game Boy first. So here's an original Game Boy game. This one is actually Tetris. It's just doesn't have the label on it. But I'm going to see if I can get a good angle here. A big check to look on the original Game Boy games is going to be the name at the top there. It's going to say Nintendo Game Boy. Now, you can have ones that say Nintendo Game Boy as well, like this Kirby's Dream Land. But if you look slightly at the boy there, it's hard with the reflection, there's a cross through the O in the boy, which is not present on here. So there's a slight difference. I've seen a ton of original Game Boy games where it just says boy in the middle. So those ones are fake. Label itself, this one's actually surprisingly, when I picked it up, it wasn't a lot. I actually thought originally it may have been original. It's actually a really good label. Pretty close to original, what original labels look like. But they're not always this good. Quite often they're poor artwork, they're blurry, the text is blurry, that sort of type thing. I mean, in this case here, you can see Kirby is partially cut off. That's a good sign that, I mean, it's potentially fake. A little blurry here. So that's another thing to look for, bad labels. Again, that being said, there are some cases where you have something like this where, okay, this is an original Tetris. Someone who is going to resell this or whatever their collection, you know what, you can get third-party people who scan the original artwork. You can get high-quality files to be able to print your own labels for these. So it still can be an original game, just with a reproduction label. Sometimes another thing to look at is on the back. In this case, they are both correct. Both of them are using a game bit. This one's obviously, this one is surprisingly the original. It's been sat out in the sun. It's just severely aged. But yeah, they both use the standard screw. You can see different screws on the original Game Boy games, but quite often they would just, you know, you'd get the crappy, like, dollar store no one wants games, use the original case sometimes, and put the fake game inside. So again, a screw is not always a good sign, but if it's anything but a game bit screw, generally that's a good sign that it can be a fake game. So I'm going to open these two up. Okay. So again, our original game, you pop it open, and there it is. So in this case, again, the Tetris is not, because it's an early game, it's not always the best example, but usually we'll have a DMG printed somewhere on it, because the DMG is the model of the original Game Boy, and we'll also have Nintendo printed on the PCB. It should be clear, should be spelled correctly, should be sort of the correct Nintendo font itself. Quite often when you see reproduction ones, may look very similar to this. It doesn't necessarily have to have, like, you know, big chips or anything else on it, but quite often what there are what they would call a glob top, where this chip itself is covered in a large glob of black epoxy. But again, that being said, that's not always a sign. There are some official games that do have glob top type things on them, but again, it varies from game to game. When in doubt, you can, if you look online, you can quite often find what all the PCBs look like for each individual game, so you can compare yours if you are questioning it. But again, to compare on something like this, so that's what the original looks like. You compare it to this one, which even to myself, this one isn't even oddity. This one isn't even what they would call a glob top. If I can get the case undone on this one. One moment, please. Alrighty, sorry about that. I'm gonna sort of semi-cover it here, actually. Hold on. Let me grab a post-it note here. Okay. Yeah, this one is quite an oddity in itself. Having a battery on it, not the oddest thing. I mean, that is quite possible on early games, especially, Pokemon, those are ones that had to save. That's not a standard Nintendo battery holder, though. That's sort of the glob top that we talked about there. These sort of chips are the oddity. You generally didn't quite see sometimes ones quite this big on a Game Boy cartridge. And that's what at first alluded to me that this might be fake, even before the sticker is the weight on this thing. This cartridge weighs almost twice as much as the normal one. Quite often the knockoff PCBs you will see are actually even smaller. They'll be lighter. This one was larger. What this one actually has is, I'm going to try and keep this part covered here, just because it's under the light. This is an EEPROM. This is a programmable ROM chip. This is actually one that can be reprogrammed. You can use a UV light to erase it via that thing, so that's why I'm covering up the hole. Technically, so someone took the ROM from an official game, wrote it onto this reprogrammable one, and put it into this cartridge. It's actually really just interesting that it was doable that way. These are quite more costly than a one-time use burn and go chip. So it's interesting that they did put something like this in here. I'd have to see about layout, because the way the Game Boy cartridge goes in, most of it's covered. This would actually be a really interesting project to make your own essentially reprogrammable cartridge where you could load your own ROMs to it, but I'm not sure what the orientation here, if it would actually fit. But something like this, yeah, definitely fake. No Nintendo markings on the back, nothing. So this is definitely a fake original Game Boy game. Then we start getting into Game Boy Advance. So we have an original Game Boy Advance here. I'm going to try and just remove some of the reflection here. If you can see on the label there, that's what the naming should look like on the cartridge. Game Boy Advance, regular Nintendo font for Game Boy Advance. You start looking at one like this. Obviously it doesn't have a label, whatever else, but it's even hard to focus in on it because the font is so tiny and small. Advance is like half the size. That's not correct. This one is close, but again, Advance is not the right font. Game Boy is, but Advance is not the right font. And here on this one, yet again, a different font. So, again, naming on the actual plastic cartridge itself is wrong. I think all of these ones are Nintendo. Semi-correct on the back, but again, slight difference in the font. These two have different fonts on the wording on the back of them. Sometimes you'll see Nintendo spelled wrong. So, I mean, there are different things to look at in that way. So a couple of signs there. Obviously, sticker. That's a correct sticker. Obviously, no sticker. Kirby, not horrible. It's actually a very clearly printed sticker. It's not quite the right color to the official one, but that could happen from fading. But again, the logo is wrong on this one. Dora, that's, I think anyone who can't see that that's not correct is may need to get glasses. So that's another thing to look for. So I mean, obviously sticker, but again, can be reproduction. Look on the back. That one's actually missing it. Is the screw. Again, you can get original screws and move them over, but that's one thing to look at. An original on a Game Boy Advance game has a tri-wing screwdriver. It's a specific, not very common screwdriver type. It only has 3 prongs on it. A lot of the knockoffs will have a 4 star or shaped like 4-prong one, which is a lot more common. Again, not always, but that's one thing to look for too. So if you see that, that is a possible sign to see if it's a fake. The last thing to look for is not super easy to do. I don't think I can easily get it on camera. If you look inside the cartridge there, from about here to here, there's actually Nintendo wording. There's actually the word Nintendo, and I believe a model number over here. Original cartridges will have that. Fake ones generally will not. It is possible, but not always. Again, here's one already out, a fake one already out. So again, no labeling or anything on the cartridge itself. It's very plain, no Nintendo, no whatever else. You do have a couple of chips, and then you have like the glob top sort of thing here. A Nintendo cartridge would have something on there for branding, whatever other the silk screening on there. It's not going to be completely plain. Comparing to a brand name one, which we will take apart here. There we go. Nintendo cartridge. Again, there is the branding, the Nintendo logo, model number there. Again, chips can vary depending on what the game is, what it has. Pokemon games will often have a battery for saving the real-time clock. So they can vary, but a brand name cartridge will look like this comparatively to the other one. So that's something else to look for in real versus fake. So sometimes it's tough on these things, especially like when people are buying them third party, like by hand. With eBay, double check the listing, see if they do say it's genuine or not. If it is, if it does say it's genuine and you do get it home and you do check that it's fake, follow up with eBay. eBay should help you with getting a refund and all that sort of type stuff. As they listed as genuine, it was not. A lot of the time people will try and get around that, saying untested sort of things. So, I mean, there's always a chance when you do buy stuff online. When you are going in person, sometimes, again, do some of the quick initial checks if you can. You can't always take it apart. They won't always let you take it apart, but that is always an option. I have done that before, especially on some more expensive games. I've gone out and said, hey, can I bring a screwdriver and just double check that this is genuine? So that's something worth potentially looking at as well. But again, hopefully that gave you at least a basic idea on at least some of the Game Boy games itself. Again, look at, in general, most of the time it's the same thing on most other cartridges. You're looking for, you know, original Nintendo or whatever brand logoing on it, sort of type thing. Are fonts wrong? Are stickers wrong? Are things missing screws? Most Nintendo over the cartridges had the same game bit on them to close, so if they're the wrong screws, that's a possibility as well. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of things to look for, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave it down in the comments, and I hope to see you next time.